everybody. Hello, Anne Margaret.
Hi.
So I'm delighted to welcome you to our Zoom, and we're just going to have an informal chat, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, perfect.
I don't want to introduce you as such because I thought you could do that yourself. So maybe we could start by you telling our followers who you are and something about the work that you do.
Okay, so I am an English language teacher. I've been teaching for 30 years. But along the way, I became interested in students who just weren't achieving as much as we'd hoped. So I started looking into causes for that. I came across dyslexia, and it's absolutely fascinating. So then I became a dyslexia assessor as well. So I still work as a dyslexia assessor. And I'm currently training to be a speech and language therapist. I run my own business, ELT Well, and that's really a way of trying to share information with other English teaching professionals.
Thank you. So on your LinkedIn profile, it says you're an ELT editor and SPLD assessor. That's SPLD then. That's speech language.
No, SPLD is specific learning difference.
Okay.
So there are a number of natural variations in the way that human brains can develop. Dyslexia is one, but there are a number which are closely related. So autism, ADHD, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, developmental language disorder. And because it's quite difficult sometimes to tell them apart, there's an umbrella term that we use, specific learning difference, and it's just a useful shorthand for looking at these different cognitive variations in the human brain.
Great. That's really handy to know because I suppose if I wanted to read up a bit more about it, I could put in that into Google, and that would be a term that's used to talk about that sort of umbrella term, if you like.
Absolutely. Specific learning difference, sometimes specific learning difficulty, but that always seems a bit negative to me. Or another term that's gaining a lot of ground now is neurodiversity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I've
neurodiversity might.
heard that one much more. Exactly. Okay, so most of the people who follow our YouTube channel are teachers who want to write materials for their classes and for different contexts, and maybe some ELT writers as well. So in terms of materials, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. And the first one is, what kind of challenges might neurodiverse learners have with traditional classroom materials? I know that's quite a big question, so I don't expect you to give a huge answer about, it depends on context, obviously, but any guidelines, any tips?
Yeah, I think it's a very individual thing. Obviously, some neurodiverse learners will really love those brightly coloured textbooks that are often used. Others might find the pages a bit cluttered. And particularly if there is like an image behind the text, that's something that can be really distracting. Too much information on one page can be quite hard to process. Tiny fonts, tiny text.
Yeah.
I mean, that's hard for all of us. And I think if the font keeps changing, that can be a bit distracting as well for some people, not for all. I think one of the things that my students struggle with is when there are, like, if you're doing like pair work and one student is told, oh, go to page 87 and another student has to go to page 96. They might go to the pages, but they might not find the way back. It can be that sort of sending students off to a different page can be
Yeah,
sometimes a little bit challenging.
that's
Um,
really interesting actually, because um there are different ways that we can do that, isn't there? We can actually have it on the same page, and just if it's an A and B thing, we can get them to cover
yeah,
the bit they're not supposed to be looking at and just focus on their bit.
there are lots
Um,
of ways of doing it. Yeah. Um, But I have found students, just getting lost in the book. But I think
Yeah,
the biggest thing I found is just too much information, and too ambitious amounts of vocabulary to learn, that sort of thing.
that's interesting too, because as a materials writer who writes for publishers, I'm usually told how many items of vocabulary I have to include,
Yeah,
and it might be 12 on this page and then another 8 on this page, whatever. So,
yeah,
is there an optimum number, or does it depend on the age and the level?
yeah. It depends on the age and it depends on the learner. But I mean, it depends on how it's presented as well, and it depends on how much time will be spent, focused on those new items. Um, but as a rule of thumb, in a lesson where you're going to be focusing on lots of other things, and the vocabulary is not incidental, but it's not the main focus. I would say 5 to 8 items is plenty.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's really interesting. That's really interesting because I mean, I don't know, I've got no idea, but I imagine the first people who came up with these, round numbers probably didn't even think about the students who might have neurodiverse um, things going on, if you like.
yeah.
So this is
Well, one
something
one
that,
of the characteristics of the specific learning differences like dyslexia, dyspraxia, um, is issues with memory. Um, so if you're going to be teaching, or if you want them to learn a lot of vocabulary, then we really need to find um, very effective ways of teaching it and helping them to practice it a lot, because they will need a lot of exposure and they'll need a lot of practice in order to retain it. That's why I say if you keep the number of new items relatively small, then they've got the time to focus on them.
yeah, yeah,
The
that
more
makes perfect
uh,
sense. I've got another question that I haven't sort of didn't mention before that I might ask, which ties into this. And I'm just wondering whether it's better to create all materials in a more simple way for a whole class, or whether to have separate materials or adaptable materials. I mean, what do you do if you're creating materials for a class
mm,
and a couple of people in the class might have um, dyslexia or another one of the things that you've mentioned? What
yeah. So what I would
do you
say
deal
is in,
with that?
in any class, in pretty much any group of people, you're going to find some of these cognitive variations, even if they haven't been identified, and even if it's not really causing an issue in their learning. They may have great strategies for getting around any difficulties that they experience. But in any class, there's going to be variation in the way that people perceive materials and the way that people learn. So when I'm producing materials for a class, which I have to say I'm not doing at the moment, I'm teaching one-to-one. Um, but I think the key thing is to keep it simple and
Yeah,
to think inclusively rather than thinking, oh, well, I'll do something special for my dyslexic learner. Try and think inclusively, what will be accessible to the largest number of people. And if I do need to make some tweaks, because you're never going to hit everybody's needs, you know, there will be some tweaking that you need to do, then you can offer choice and you can say, okay, so there's this handout, um, which has got this activity on, but if you don't want to do this activity, here's another way of accessing that material. Obviously you might not use those words, but just offering choice to the class and letting them choose the activity which they think would be most accessible to them. Now you might find that you get students coming along and choosing what they think is the easier option. Hmm. In which case it's absolutely fine to say, oh, yeah, that's great that you want to try that, but why don't you try this as well? Because it's much easier to say to somebody, oh, I think you could do something more difficult, rather than to say to
yeah,
somebody, oh, I think you should try something easier. you know you
yeah. That's a
you give
really
them
good point. Yeah, I love the idea of choice anyway, in materials, because I think sort of ties in with motivation. And I know that if I'm given a choice, I know that in my teaching, when I've given students a choice, not for the reasons that you're suggesting now, but simply because I thought it was a good idea. When I've given students a choice of different homework activities, for example, more students have done the homework. Whereas when I've said you all have to do this, it's that feeling that they have a little bit of a say in
Yeah,
things,
it comes
isn't it?
down to autonomy, doesn't it? And the feeling that, they have some control over their learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay, so another question then. What advice would you give to anyone who'd like to find out a bit more about neurodiversity?
Well, I would say these days there's quite a lot of information available. There are lots of websites, there are books. I mean, it depends how you want to access the information. Going back to choice, as we were saying.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm bound to say that my website is probably as good a starting point as any. That's eltwell.com. And there are links there to other sites. Judith Kormosh, who's professor of second language acquisition at Lancaster University that I work with, she has a really great website, and there's a link there from my website to her website where she's collated a lot of information together. There are online courses. Judith runs a course. She ran it this year. I'm not sure she'll be running it next year with FutureLearn. There are courses on FutureLearn, for example. I have an online course which is roll on, roll off, so people can join in anytime now. Understanding Neurodiversity, it's called.
How
Yeah.
long does your course last, Anne Margaret?
So at the moment, it's a 10-session course, and people can work through it at their own pace. So it depends how much time you have to devote to it, but it's 10 sessions, and each session needs about an hour, I would say.
And do you think that course would be useful for teachers writing materials for their classes in different contexts, or is it children, adults? What
Yeah,
kind of?
it's designed to be quite broad. It starts with the kind of an overview of different neurotypes, and then it talks about how you can make activities which will support memory or organization, or the kind of key things that neurodiverse learners probably need a bit of extra help with. Now that course is currently available on my website, but there are changes afoot.
Tell us about the changes then. Maybe to finish, I can ask you if you've got any new projects in the pipeline or what you're working on at the moment, because that's always, I know that you're someone who's always learning, always, because we met on another course,
That's
and I
right.
think that this
Yeah.
is this is something that makes you, well, I think that, you're modeling what I think teachers should be doing, learning all the time.
Oh,
So what's new?
yeah. So I am training to be a speech and language therapist, which is absolutely fascinating. And so I will be making some changes to my website. I'm going to have a refresh of the website to include more information about speech and language needs, as well as neurodiversity. And the online course, Understanding Neurodiversity, I'm going to split it into two. So I'm going to have one course which is Understanding Neurodiversity, and that will include a new section on developmental language disorder, which is a specific learning difference that nobody talks about in ELT.
I've never heard of it. I have never heard of it. What is it?
Well, I think the best way to describe it is like it's a cousin of dyslexia, where people actually have issues with things like syntax. So actually getting the words in order, it can affect semantics as well. So understanding the connections between words. I mean, it's something that English language teachers, I mean, we absolutely need to know about this, and
Yeah.
I'm new to, you know, I'm just coming to this in the last couple of years, and I'm thinking, how have I managed to teach this long without knowing that some of my learners might actually have a developmental language disorder? You know, and probably I've seen it and thought, oh, maybe that's dyslexia.
Yeah.
So this is a new section I'm going to put into the course about developmental language disorder. It's not a great name. I don't like the name of it, but
Yeah,
that's what.
these words like disorder and
Yeah, yeah,
it's all very negative, isn't it? Where we
yeah.
should be thinking in terms of, differences that make us unique. Not
Yeah.
maybe that day will
So,
come.
so maybe my next campaign will be to try and change the name of that DLD to developmental language difference or something. So that would be one half of the course would be just about the neurotypes, and the other half would be about supporting learners in the classroom. So
Yeah.
make them like more bite-sized courses, really. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
Exciting. Exciting, because I think that teachers, we and writers, you know, we need you to do your side of things and your research and developing your courses, etc., so that then that filters down. And I when I look back to when I first started teaching and writing, we never even used to talk about these subjects.
yeah,
And what you were saying earlier on about a crowded page, when I think of some of the things that I used to create for my students, oh my goodness,
yeah.
they were just awful
And
looking
it was
back.
and it was often because of resources. I mean, you know, we had to use as little paper as possible. You know, we had limited resources, limited time. Um, yeah, it was about getting as much onto one sheet as possible.
Yeah, photocopying prices as well. So we'd get really small print and, squeeze it all in and
That,
probably cause no end of headaches.
mm,
Well, thank you very much, Margaret. All of this, I mean, it's we could talk for hours and hours, but I think it's good to just get a taster of what kind of things we need to be thinking about, where we can find more information. It's good to know what your plans are for the future too. We'll keep an eye on those, and I'll put any links below this video in our YouTube place as well, so that people can find you. You're on LinkedIn. You've got a website. Your website is probably the best place to go to find you. Can you remind us of the name of that website, just
yeah,
to
it's
end?
eltwell.com.
And
eltwell.com.
that's an important message to end on, probably, isn't it? To do things well, to be well, and to
Yeah,
make sure that our students are well. So thank you
exactly.
very much for talking to us today.
It's been a pleasure.
You've given me lots of food for thought.
Oh, it's been lovely talking to you, Kath. Thank you.